Counter-Strike 2 has finally been released to the general public, and while I did get my hands on the beta during the last wave of beta releases, I wanted to wait for the official release to see what that would bring before I judge the game fairly. With that being said, you can no longer play CSGO as Counter-Strike 2 completely replaced it, so my last video on comparing CSGO and Valorant is already outdated. And I already know what you're thinking. No, I'm not just doing this to milk the success of the last video, even though it was really successful and I thank you guys for that success. But I do think there are a lot of changes that happened with Counter-Strike 2, and I wanted to give the comparison another shot so it's more fair for those that are just getting into both Counter-Strike 2 and Valorant. I'm also only going to be going over what has changed with Counter-Strike 2, so I still recommend you guys to watch my previous comparison video just in case you haven't already. And if OniPixel is watching this by any chance, thank you for taking the opportunity to check this video out. I really appreciate it. First, let's start with the weapons and utility because there are actually some big changes that happened with it. Back in CSGO, you had access to almost all weapons at your will. The only exceptions would be the variants of certain weapons. For example, the terrorists would have access to the AK-47 and the Galil, while counter-terrorists would have the two M4s and the FAMAS. Counter-Strike 2 introduced loadouts. Before you join a match, you could customize what weapons you want in specific categories, but the catch is that you won't have access to every weapon like it was before. So if I wanted both M4s available in my loadout, I would have to sacrifice a rifle. If I want multiple shotguns and submachine guns in my loadout, I would have to sacrifice the LMGs. If you want both the R8 revolver and the Deagle in the pistol category, why? Valorant has the script flipped. You can access all the guns on either side without the worry of variants, but utility is what's restricted since it's a hero-based shooter, so only certain agents can flash, smoke, use grenades and molotovs, and each piece of utility has different variations on how they work. I mentioned this in my previous video, but a lot of people like to overcomplicate the abilities, saying that it's just Overwatch all over again, where it's just random bullshit being thrown everywhere and it's just really confusing to understand. It might be confusing to understand at first, but once you really look at it, they're just different variations of smokes, flashes, grenades, and molotovs. For example, Yoru's flashbangs bounce off walls before they pop. Skye throws her birds and they could pop them at will, and I learned that you can't shoot them anymore, so that's my bad. Breach's flashbangs can only be used when they go through a wall. It's easy to look at this and be overwhelmed, hence why people overcomplicate them, but at the end of the day, they're all flashbangs. You just turn away from them just like regular flashbangs in Counter-Strike. The hardest part is just learning how each variation works, but once you get that part down, you'll treat them like it's a regular flashbang. However, this comes with a huge con still. Since each piece of utility is based on what hero you pick, you have to carefully choose which agent to pick before each match begins, and you're just gonna have to pray that your teammates know what they're doing when they pick their agents, because if you pick an agent you simply suck at, you're stuck with that agent for the rest of the game. Now, before everyone says, haha, this is a win for Counter-Strike, it really isn't. Yes, it's a huge W that Counter-Strike lets players fill in roles that your team needs, but how many of you actually have the capacity to do that? To this day, I bump into people in the mid to high ranks that have no idea how to do the stair smoke or the mid smoke on Mirage. I know them, so I could easily fill in, but not everyone is me. If you're one of those unfortunate souls that don't know any of the lineups and you get a bunch of teammates that also don't know any of the lineups, you're basically screwed. When it comes to weapons and utility, I still think it's a 50-50 split, as both have their pros and cons and both can be easily fixed by simply queuing with friends, but if you're like me and you don't have that luxury, you're pretty much screwing yourself either way. Next up is the matchmaking experience, and honestly, I'm really surprised with what Counter-Strike 2 has brought to the table. Back in CSGO, the game used Glicko 2 for their ranking system, which rewards players more for logging in and winning every day instead of winning a bunch of times in one day. I think we could all agree that it was an extremely stupid and flawed ranking system, since the vast majority of us can't play every day consistently, let alone win consistently. It also didn't help that the servers were 64 tick instead of 128 tick, meaning that the servers were less responsive, which would change the way certain smoke lineups worked, and the hit registration would be inconsistent because of it. Having such lackluster servers and a shitty ranking system created one of the worst matchmaking experiences I have ever experienced in any game. If you wanted the best possible CSGO experience, you would have to use a third-party service like Faceit or ESEA. And while they're both great services, the fact that there were requirements for a proper experience was an absolute embarrassment. Let's take a look at Valorant. The game offers 128 tick servers, an elo-based system, and an anti-cheat that actually works, all without having to download third-party software, which is how it should be with every competitive game. Thankfully, with Counter-Strike 2, Valve is completely changing everything. For starters, the game now runs on a combination of sub-tick and 64-tick servers. Sub-tick is supposed to be more responsive as the servers now base your shots on when you made the input instead of when the server registered it. In my opinion, this feels so much better than what we had before. I'm willing to bet my headshot percentage in CS2 is already higher than CSGO simply because my headshots actually register now, unlike before where I could be tapping on someone's head completely standing still with none of the shots registering. The ranking system has also been changed. No longer is your rank determined by a badge. Your rank is now determined on a number given to you, and that number increases when you win and decreases when you lose. In other words, it's elo based, which is exactly what everyone wanted. Valve also made an alternative ranked mode for those that want to improve on each map individually. Remember back in CSGO where you could rank up by only playing Mirage and Inferno 24/7 while never learning any of the other maps? This was a big problem back in the day because people would just play Mirage and Inferno all day, and once they get to a high rank and they play something like, I don't know, Nuke or Ancient or Anubis, they would just be completely garbage at it and unintentionally throw the game. This issue is theoretically gone as each map has its own rank, so if you're one of those boring people that just wants to play Mirage and Inferno all day, you can do so. But if you decide to change things up by playing a map you're unfamiliar with, your rank with the other maps won't be affected, so you could be a Verdict Global and a Silver 2 Anubis player simultaneously. Valorant has always tried to force feed the map knowledge to their players by not giving them the option to choose what maps to queue for. I honestly don't mind this since forcing players to play a map is the only way players can learn new maps and improve the map with feedback, but there are a handful of people out there that simply don't like this, and I don't blame them for it. Counter-Strike 2 tried to do a middle ground by letting players pick and ban what maps they want to play before the match started, but the problem is that everyone is still really picky with their map pool. Most of my games so far have consisted of nothing but Mirage and Inferno and sometimes Vertigo, and the game got really stale because of it. I personally think Premier should pick a random map for players to play in like what Valorant does, and people that want the freedom of choice can play with the individual map ranking system. While Counter-Strike 2's matchmaking system has been drastically improved, I still think Valorant's is better for one reason only, at least in this category, and that is that the base game still remains to be the path to pro. If you're a top percentile player in Valorant, let's say Immortal or Radiant, you could use that to your advantage, go play in Premier, and climb your way to tier 1. For the longest time in CSGO, the only way you'd even get a chance at recognition is by using those third-party services I mentioned before, which creates a really confusing path to pro for newcomers. If someone is Radiant in Valorant, they could probably beat pro players. If you're global elites in CSGO, it means absolutely nothing. What's your Faceit rank? What's your ESEA rank? If you haven't played either of those, you're just wasting your time. If Valve makes the base game the definitive competitive experience and the official path to pro with these new servers and ranking systems, that would be the nail in the coffin and would make CS2 the better experience, but it's too early to say anything about that, so Valorant still reigns supreme in this category. The skins are something that haven't really changed in either game, but I'm going to take the opportunity to clarify a few things. Some of you have tried to defend Counter-Strike's monetization by saying that Valorant's is even more predatory, which no. Saying that Counter-Strike skins have real world value and by mentioning the market. So let me get one thing clear. I hate both methods, but I hate Counter-Strike's more. The main reason is because I hate loot boxes as it's basically gambling, and I hate gambling, not just in Counter-Strike, but in all games that have it. Some people have said that you could ignore the gambling aspects by buying their skins off the market, which is true, and thank God for that, but the only reason why the market exists and why the prices are the way they are is because of the loot boxes. The rarer the item is, the more expensive it's going to be. The more common the item is, the cheaper it's going to be. So while the market is nice, it does stem from loot boxes and suckers that dump their hard-earned cash on them and only get a fraction of what they paid back. Another argument I hear is that the skins have real-world value. So let's say you get bored of a skin, you could sell it on the Steam market for another game, or you could sell it on a third-party site for actual money. To me, that only makes the issue worse. Because these skins have real-world value, it gives people more of an incentive to gamble and invest in basically simple paint jobs. Real-world value is what caused the creation of all these gambling sites, what caused iBuyPower to throw, what caused T. Barton and Pro Syndicate to try to trick their audience with their own gambling sites. When it comes to Valorant skins, yes, they are way too expensive for what they are. Yes, you could argue that it's scummy to have skins in a rotating timer with the possibility of not seeing the skin you actually want for months, even years if you're that unlucky. But if I had to pick one method for being the worst method, it would still have to go to Counter-Strike, because yes, it's nice you have more options without the fear of missing out. But there's a lot of scummy crap that has to go on in the background for that to be even possible. But like I said in my previous video, I think the main issue is that gamers have put way too much value towards in-game cosmetics, not just in Counter-Strike and Valorant, but in every game that has them. People will literally bitch and moan on the internet simply because the pretty pixels on the screen cost money. Look at Overwatch 2. People were pissed that loot boxes were replaced with a store system, among other things. For Halo Infinite, to this day, there are Halo fans that refuse to play the game simply because certain armor sets are locked behind a paywall and refuse to play until every piece of armor becomes obtainable for free. So basically never. At the end of the day, I just don't give a damn about skins. They've always been an optional extra in my eyes, and they still are to this day, and people that see them as anything else need to get their priorities straight. In the end, have my thoughts changed? A little bit, I guess. While I still think both Counter-Strike and Valorant are great games with bright futures ahead of them, Counter-Strike 2 has had massive improvements overall that actually make me want to play Counter-Strike again. It does suck that it took Valve over a decade and an entire remake for them to fix basic issues that should have been fixed many years ago, but at least they're here now, and the future of Counter-Strike 2 already looks bright because of it. And no, Counter-Strike 2 won't kill Valorant, and Valorant definitely won't kill Counter-Strike 2. They both need each other as reasons to improve themselves, because if one truly dies, then the other gets lazy, and I think Counter-Strike players know better than anyone else that laziness only leads to disaster. That is going to be it for today's video. This did take me a while to make since my house was basically under construction for like a week or two, and now I have a new setup, so no more annoying echo. Yay! So if you guys did enjoy the video, leave a like, comment your thoughts down in the comments below, subscribe for more content, and I'll talk to you all later.